This is the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group biweekly sync. It's December 7th, 2017. This is Patrick Rogers. I'm back. I'm very excited to be back and talking with all of you. I had a wonderful opportunity to be off on family leave for an extended period, which is a fantastic thing Microsoft let me do. It lets everybody do, not just me. But so very excited to be back. Very excited to be re-engaging with the community and look forward to this call and updating folks on what we've been up to. So for folks that might be new to the call or watching the recordings for the first time, this is the SharePoint Patterns and Practices call. So it's part of a larger program, and the special interest groups were formed to give a chance for audiences who are interested in more specialized areas, in this case client-side development. We have another SIG that covers the CSOM PowerShell development, and really like to give those folks an opportunity to get a little bit deeper involved in those areas of interest that we just can't dive into on the monthly community calls because it's just too broad of a topic. So these specialized interest groups or special interest groups were formed, and on this one we talk a lot about the SharePoint framework, latest releases, news, new tips and tricks, as well as demos around SharePoint framework. And then as well we talk about this JavaScript core component we've been working on for over a year now, which is really exciting to think about that this has gone on that long and been as successful as it has been. And that's due, again, to all of you in the community. So 2 links down there at the bottom, aka MSSPPNP-community will take you out to the Microsoft Tech Community area for SharePoint. That's a great place if you have general SharePoint development questions, not just around client-side development, but around all kinds of SharePoint development or even SharePoint administration, things like that. Doesn't necessarily have to be development. Great place to ask those questions. And then aka MSSP Dev Docs is a new one to me, but I'm going to guess takes you to the Dev Docs, which is where you would report issues around the SharePoint client-side framework and provide feedback.
Patrick, no, sorry. So that's the official documentation for SharePoint. Just a quick link on landing on the docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint. So.
Good. Well, we all learned something this morning.
But the fair point, Patrick, before you go back on your role, we should actually have a specific link on the AKMS link for the SP DevDocs issue list, because we want to get those issues tracked in the issue list rather than random comments in the, for example, in our articles. But that's a different topic. So let's update the slide for the next one.
So scratch what I said. That takes you to the official SharePoint documentation link there. So moving right along into our agenda. So what do we have today? We've got the JS core component, got some updates to talk to you all about around our @PNP scope work, as well as some updates for SPPNP.js, SharePoint framework latest news, and then we've got some demos around the SharePoint PNP.js. We've added the ALM API support to the last release. And then as well, the @PNP library, I want to talk through what that's going to mean and what our thoughts are, and then sort of solicit feedback from everybody about those directions, because again, it's all very community driven, so I want to ensure that we're getting the feedback from folks and folks are able to have their voices heard. Then we've got 2 really cool demos. Russell's got a React security grid SharePoint framework web part, and Chris has an SVG image web part, which shows off a couple of the controls, client-side controls. So 2 very cool demos from those folks. And then we should have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, but we'll see in terms of the demo time. Always like to talk about the opportunities to participate. So if you're new to the calls or new to looking for a way to participate, really invite everyone to get involved in the way they would most like. So demoing a SharePoint framework solution, so that could be a web part, that could be an extension, that could be something else SharePoint framework related on this call. So obviously we've opened this up to the community and look forward to getting folks to demo on this call. Contributing on GitHub, so that's going to any of the repos, reporting an issue, providing a PR to fix an issue, providing feedback on features you'd like to see, things like that. Really invite folks to contribute, get involved on GitHub. Demo an SPPNP.js project. So there's a lot of folks have done stuff with SPPNP.js that may or may not be in SharePoint framework. So either way, invite you to demo something related to that library. And then finally, providing feedback, whether it's through the GitHub channels I mentioned earlier, whether it's coming to these calls and providing feedback, or whether on the forums is providing feedback. But really, we want your feedback. We take your feedback to heart. We can't always immediately act on every piece of feedback, but we really do take them to heart, read them, internalize them, and look to see how we can shape the roadmap moving forward based on the feedback from all of you out there in the community. So keep that great feedback coming. So real quick, PNP.js core component, got a nice update here for everybody. Right when I got back, we released SPPNP.js 3.02. That had some updates on issues and feedback from the community, so I went through the issues list, knocked out a bunch of that stuff, and then as well, sorry, we'll go back a slide. And got a couple new features in there. The main one there is the ALM API, so we got those added. I'm going to show those a little bit on the call here in a second. And I did want to talk a little bit about the work continues on the @PNP. And so I wanted to sort of talk about what this means and sort of the roadmap going forward, understanding we don't have definite times at this point, but wanted to talk to you guys and start to get this out there. So the idea of moving to this @PNP scope really is not a move away at all from patterns and practices or SharePoint or any of the work we've done before. It's simply a way to create a container for the patterns and practices work. For those folks that might not be aware, in GitHub, a top-level thing, so we have github.com/PNP, is considered an organization, and an organization is tied to a scope. And so you've all seen those packages that are @PNP/ something, or more likely you've seen like @Microsoft/ something if you're doing a lot of SharePoint framework work. And that scope allows us a little bit more freedom to distribute our packages, because we, as a community-driven effort, can't really release stuff as @Microsoft. And because we're looking at doing stuff that isn't necessarily always SharePoint, it didn't seem right to really be releasing stuff under @SharePoint. So we looked at how can we have a scope, what kind of container can we place our work in, and we were lucky enough to work with the prior owner of the PNP organization. That wasn't actually in use by them, so we got that transferred over to us, which is very exciting. And then we actually got the scope on NPM transferred over to us as well. So we were able to create this container within which we can distribute the work we all do together as a community. So right now we've got some beta releases out there for the new libraries that will be the successor of SPPNP.js under @PNP. There's a couple of components released under @PNP. And that work will continue to expand. So don't worry about too much of it yet. That's, we're working on the communications, we're working on the releases, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the demo. But it's very much building on the success of SPPNP.js, the growth in the community, and then looking ahead at how we can grow and better align to sort of the community kind of standards out there, and what some of the other larger projects are doing. We very much looked at Angular, what that team has done as sort of a template for our work. I'll talk about that a little bit in the demo. The aim is to have an initial release by the end of this calendar year. We are very close to that. The coding is, in quotes, done, because we all know coding is never truly done. And we've lost the presentation. There we go. I think it's back for me. Hopefully it's back for everybody. But so working on the docs, and I'll talk through that again on the demo. Lots of docs to write. One of our goals is to have more documentation for this release than we did for the prior release. Part of that documentation is going to be a transition guide, so moving from SPPNP.js to the new libraries, and looking for feedback about that process, because we want to make sure it's an easy transition. Do want to ensure that folks do know that SPPNP.js is not going to go away. We're going to continue maintaining it for 6 months from the release of the new libraries. And with that transition guide, hopefully 6 months is enough time for folks to get their projects updated. But even after that 6 months, SPPNP.js isn't going to go away. We will continue to support, or I'm sorry, continue to accept pull requests from the community, issues from the community, and things like that. It just will not as much be the focus of the core team, but the library itself will live on in GitHub. We're not going to delete it. The versions, of course, will remain on NPM, etc. So we aren't going to break anyone's existing stuff, so to speak. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then I did want to identify Andrew Kolchakov has done a great job being very active. A lot of you, if you've submitted issues or been on Gitter around the SPPNP.js, you've probably heard from him. And then he's been doing a great job, especially while I was out, of answering a lot of questions and really just being involved and helping out and submitting pull requests, and kind of as a recognition of that work and seeing the great stuff he's done, he's going to be taking on a little bit larger role here with the SPPNP.js library, as well as then the @PNP libraries once we get those moving. So he'll be helping with PRs, he'll be merging those, helping with issues and things like that. But I did want to identify and thank him for the great work he's done getting involved and kind of rolling up his sleeves and just diving in. So I'm going to... Oh, I'm not the presenter. That's what happened. Somebody took over. So quick demo. I'm going to switch over here and share my desktop. You go on leave for a while, you forget how to use Skype, so bear with me for a second. All right, so I wanted to talk about the ALM APIs. So a lot of you, I know this was talked about in calls around this being added to the CSOM core components. So we've now added that support to the SPPNP.js. So the main way to do that is the web object now has a get app catalog method. And one of the things I'm sure you guys have read or talked about in the past is the app catalog exists both for each web, and then this special tenant app catalog, which is really only differentiated by the web you open that app catalog on. So get app catalog method called in this manner will get the catalog for whatever this current web is. So fairly straightforward. You can also then chain off it. I hope folks are fairly familiar with the API at this point. So you can get the app catalog, and the app catalog itself is a queryable collection. So you can do selects, top, skip, things like that, and that will give you all the apps in the available apps in the catalog. We provided a little bit of flexibility, so you can get any catalog by passing a URL in, and this will open up the app catalog, in my case for my tenant app catalog, which is usually sites/app catalog for your tenant, and that'll work for any site. So you can see that here, and you can open up, this is just another site, so I can get the app catalog for that site off of an existing web. And then finally, just wanted to show you guys, you can create a web. So if you already have a web in existence, you can then create a new app catalog off of that web. You could also pass a URL directly to app catalog. And once you have a catalog, you can do things like get the app by ID. I'm not going to go through all the methods, but I did want to show you. We do have the ALM API methods are documented here in the wiki, so you can go to the developer guide and look at the ALM API. And this will talk about, again, the idea of the tenant app catalog and the web app catalog, how to get the app catalog, so talking about what I just talked about, and then the operations you can perform. So listing the apps, adding an app, getting an app, and then those app actions of deploy, retract, install, upgrade, remove. Remember, some of those, specifically retract, deploy, and remove, will only work on a tenant app catalog web. So that's all documented. Try those out. Those are released now in the 3.02 release, so do check those out. And now I want to talk about the @PNP work we've done. So folks familiar with the @PNP, the SPPNP.js library have seen it grow over the last year or so, and I think are very familiar with the idea that it's got a lot of stuff in it. And looking at that, one of the things we wanted to do was simplify it a little bit in the sense of breaking up the pieces and allowing folks to install just the pieces they need. And a lot of this came from, as we looked at and are still looking at, expanding our graph coverage. Well, if I'm just want to do graph stuff, why do I need all the SharePoint stuff? And then vice versa, if I just want to do SharePoint stuff, why do I need the weight of all the graph stuff to also be in the library? So to that end, this is our new repo. And so you can actually see it here, github.com/pnp. So this is out there. I would ask that at this point, nobody's submitted any pull requests to this, but if you try this out and find issues and things like that, please do submit the issues or feedback. We do want to hear that stuff, but I would say no pull requests at this point, please, because I still have a lot of moving pieces, and it'll just be easier for the time being to be able to kind of work in isolation a little bit. But do try it out and do report issues. Definitely want to hear from that. But so we broke everything up into a bunch of different packages. So, for example, logging became its own package, and this package you could install in any application. It has logging, happens to have no other dependencies, so if you really like the way we did our logging, you could install that in any application you're using and use that logging. Same for common, so if you like some of our shared utilities, you can install just the common package. And then for the rest, right? And then one thing we've done to try and help ease the transition is we've created a package called PNP.js, which is really a roll-up and collection of all the packages into something that matches closely the SPPNP.js package. So we'll be rolling that out. So in terms of the package structure, each of these is identical, and that's on purpose to make it sort of easy to manage, but also easy to process through a common build chain. But if you look at this, so we've got a source folder, which surprisingly has source files in it, a test folder, which has tests in it, and then we've got a docs folder. So this is a new kind of idea we're introducing, that we're going to have docs that live next to the code. So this comes from a piece of feedback I've heard a lot, which is I didn't know there was documentation, I couldn't find documentation, and looking for a way, so maybe the wiki isn't clear enough, isn't easy enough for folks to find, they don't see that right away. So we've put the docs here right next to the code, and what that means is hopefully, one, it's easier to find, and two, it's easier to keep up to date, because as I'm doing a code change, I can do a doc change right next to it, and I can push all that in the same pull request. And so that'll become part of our contribution guidance. If you are doing a contribution, please update or add to the docs to reflect whatever that contribution is, and that will benefit, the idea being that'll benefit all of us moving forward, so we'll have better documentation coverage of the entire set of packages. And so the docs, so we have a gulp docs, so you can see these are MD files. So those are going to distribute with each of the packages. So if we actually look at, these would be the distributed packages. So very familiar to everybody, but the docs folder will go along with each of the packages now. So the documentation will move along with each package. And then we'll talk about the dist files here in a second. But we're also going to use this same documentation, and I've put together a processing pipeline. And so we have we're going to generate a website. So we're going to use the GitHub pages, and every time we do a release, we'll regenerate the docs and push those out to GitHub pages. As you can see, this is probably the prettiest website you're going to see today. It's at least the most readable, but this is just a start. And so for each thing, we'll have common, for example, has its files. Again, it's very pretty, and we'll talk about all the things. And so we'll have this out there as a site. So looking for folks to help out with this and branding. I'm talking to a couple of people, but if anybody out there has some real design expertise or desire to learn design expertise, this would be a great opportunity to help us brand this site. So right now it's just very simple. It's the MD files translated directly to HTML, but we'll be looking to add to that, get obviously some formatting, some colors and fonts and things around to make this really pretty. But that'll get pushed out with every release as well to hopefully help with our documentation coverage. Another thing we've done jumping back here, jumping back here is, so in our dist folder for each package, we've got a lot of different files now. And you might say, Patrick, why do you have all these files? Great question. Really, this is to support as many formats as we can. So we've got, and I'm looking at the common package, but this would be the same across all of them. So when you see just common JS, in this case, this is going to be an ES 2016 format, modules and structure that works with sort of roll-up, works with the Webpack tree shaking, works with some of the other more advanced stuff that can support the more modern module formats. Then we've got a common ES5. So these are ES5 modules of the same thing. So compiled down to ES5. Then we have an ES5 UMD, which is everything in ES5 format bundled as a UMD module, right? So that'd be more for use in the browser. And this contains only the code for the common library. Excuse me. And then we've got minified versions of that. And then finally, for each thing, there's going to be this giant file name, so common ES5 UMD bundle, which is going to be a UMD module that's a bundle of all of the things that this common thing depends on. So in common's case, it depends on logging. So this bundle is going to have the common code as well as the logging code all bundled together. And that's to provide folks an easy way if you're looking to, I just want to use the common stuff. I want to use it in the browser, and I want to have one file. Here you go. And that's going to be the same for the SP library, the graph library, etc. There will still be one file you can grab that is a bundle of all the functionality you need just to make things work. So you don't have to deploy 6, 8, 12 different files in parallel. We're not up to 12 yet, but one day it could be, right? So it's to provide a little bit of help to folks looking to simplify their deployment process. And the last piece I wanted to look at is, that never works for me, opening code. We'll just open with Notepad. So if we look, well, that's terrible. So let's open with WordPad. So if we look at our package JSON that's going to go out with every package, the other thing we tried to update is this idea that there's different bundlers out there that might be more advanced than sort of the basic stuff. So we took the guidance that the roll-up folks have put out, and we looked at tree shaking and stuff when we first started writing this, and it just wasn't mature yet. And so now it's been, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months, a year. So it's a little bit more mature. More folks are doing it. There's better guidance. So main is still going to point to that UMD module. So that's going to work across all your types of deployment, so your different browsers as well as your different node versions. But then we've added this module and this ES 2015. I'm sorry, I said 2016. So ES 2015 module versions. So this module points to the ES5 modules, and this ES 2015 points to the ES 2015 module format. So that allows rollup and those other things I mentioned to package these more efficiently and tries to align a little bit more to what folks are doing in that space. And the other thing I'll mention, all of these libraries will be released as a unit, so they'll be released in lockstep, and they'll all have peer dependencies that all match. So there's a whole there's a beta set that I just released yesterday. They're all going to be 100-beta 6. That makes it very easy to know that you've got all the libraries in alignment. There's not going to be any confusion about beta 6 works with beta 3 or anything like that. They're going to be released as a unit every time as we go out. So just wanted to mention that. And then finally, a couple of things I wanted to show folks. So in you've still got the ability through here to do F5, so we can still do the F5 debugging, but it's now in a separate folder called Launch. And that works exactly the way it did previously, for folks who did F5 debugging in Visual Studio Code. Still able to do that. But one of the things we added is this serve folder with a file in here. So I can actually now run my gulp serve, and it'll serve a file that is this code. So I can, and this is all watched, so I can easily, before you kind of had to put stuff into a script editor web part and bounce back and forth and do different things, and it was a little bit annoying. So this is hopefully a lot easier, where I can write my code and test things directly in the browser using the gulp serve by just adding a script tag to a page. And because of time, I'm not going to show too much of this, but the last thing I wanted to mention around the serve is you can still do this tag p, --p for package, and I could still serve. That's not going to do anything, right? Because you have to say go up. Also forgotten how to type. So this is going to serve just that individual package. So you'll be able to still test in the browser individual packages, not just that serve file. So giving folks a little bit of flexibility around how they want to test things. And well, that's new, so I'll take a look at that after the call. As you can see, very much a work in progress. The next thing I wanted to mention is if we look at Graph, we've added a thing here. There's now for Node an ADL fetch client. So inside of Node, you could supply a tenant, an app ID, and an app secret, which I've got off in a different file, and you'll be able to now query against the graph from Node using this ADL fetch client. And so that's done using setup. So I think a lot of folks are familiar with this, but you just set your fetch client factory to return a new ADL fetch client, and then you can query the graph directly from Node, which I think is very exciting. Development opens up some new scenarios, allows us to write tests in Node the way we did for SharePoint, and so that'll be something we're developing moving forward. And this is just for Node at this point, and this actually relies on the ADL Node library put out by the Graph team under the hood, so that'll stay up to date as well. Other thing I want to mention, I'm adding like process exit to a lot of these samples and debugging stuff. That just makes it a little cleaner to exit after you debug out of some things. And then one other thing I wanted to show folks, because I think it's another thing we talked about a long time ago, and we couldn't actually do it because of limitations in TypeScript. But a lot of you might remember there's like get and get as, post and post as, so you could supply typing. Well, in TypeScript now you can actually have a default type argument. So we got to go get rid of those as methods, and now you can just use get exactly as you did before, or get and supply a type as you used to do with get as, which I think is a nice addition to the TypeScript language, but gives us a lot of flexibility to sort of clean up our code, which is another thing we're trying to do in this effort, excuse me, is clean up our code as much as we can. So we'll return here to the presentation. And I think we are ready to pass this over to Vesa for a SharePoint framework update. But the last thing I want to say is thank you, everybody. Well, I'm very happy to be back. Just published a beta, so do pull these down, give them a try, give us the feedback. Really look forward to hearing from folks and what they think. Vesa?
Thank you, Patrick. So a lot of deep dive of things, and just from a clarity perspective as well. Whenever Patrick says, like every one of you know, or like we've been chatting, it doesn't mean that everybody actually knows and everybody is up to date on what Patrick is showing. So because you need to be actually quite inside of the TypeScript, quite inside of the development cycles to be able to understand what he's showing. And we know that there's a lot of people in this course who are gradually getting into the SharePoint framework and testing stuff out as well. So you'll get there eventually, but it doesn't mean that you need to understand exactly what Patrick is doing right now. And to be honest, the neat thing about the BMPTS core is that you can take advantage of that one just by using the API. You don't really need to understand the ins and outs of the library. It's just encapsulating the complexity. Right, Patrick?
And to be really fair, Patrick doesn't often understand what Patrick's talking about, so...
That's a fair point as well. Yeah. Oh, we are that transparent on our communication. Cool. So let's talk about a few notes and a few news related on SharePoint Framework. because we want to actually give some time for Chris and Russell on their demos as well. So I won't be taking too much time on this one. But a few things. The site collection app catalog, this is actually the first time ever we are announcing anything on the special interest group call, and this has not even gone live on the Twitter. There's certain reasons why this happened, which is a long internal story. But the site collection app catalog is actually available for you to take advantage today. So what this means, and I'm going to actually quickly explain that on the following slide, is that if you are a tenant administrator, you are able to activate the site collection app catalog already today using the tenant admin PowerShells. If you go to the HTTPS or HTTP AKMS SPDev site call app catalog, right now that AKMS address is pointing to a support article, which is explaining what is the PowerShell to be executed. We're adding additional content on this one, so the AKMS address will be updated to docs.microsoft.com relatively soon. From full transparency perspective, there was an interesting discussion internally that some people didn't quite understand the demand on this capability, so they didn't really see this as a massive announcement. At least for me, and based on the stuff what we talked about in Ignite, this is actually a pretty big thing, because now you can do scoped deployment of your customizations. Even though, yes, the first version might have some limitations, but I think we'll get there. We'll add additional capabilities there as well. Yes, I completely agree on Leo's comment on this one. Now, what does it actually mean in practice? We've gone these slides through a few times in the past, but just to reiterate the message, it means that typically, normally, you have a tenant-level app catalog in Office 365 level. So if you put something there, all of those solutions are available and visible across all of the all of the site collections and sites. Now, using the site collection scope app catalog, which is still controlled by the tenant admin, you can enable a site collection specific app catalog, which means that your solution, SPFx solution or an add-in, is only available within that site collection. So it's a scoped way of deploying the customization to be available. From a functionality perspective, this is actually super easy. It's a one PowerShell command to enable that in a one site collection, or a second site collection command to disable that from the site collection. We do have some known limitation, which we're working at this point. So there's no PowerShell commandlet to get a list of site collections where this feature is enabled. So you need to kind of, you need to either wait a while to get that feature available, or you need to track where the site collection scope app catalog has been enabled. A small gap, but that will be addressed in the future as well. But really the key points of this one, or why is it so important, it absolutely provides flexibility for enterprises on the deployment options. So you're able to, for example, target some of your SharePoint Framework web parts only to be available in your global intranet, which is typically a classic publishing site, because SPFx works in a classic publishing site as well, but not to be available, for example, in a collaboration site. And that is absolutely a massive deal. It also provides decentralized management of add-ins and SharePoint Framework packages. So as a tenant administrator, I can delegate that, hey, within this global intranet site collection, let's leave those guys to be responsible of their own thing, and they can actually enable stuff as they wish, and they can easily do that. And also scope deployment, so the visibility of a functionality in one particular site collection. Now, one thing to remember on the decentralized ad management and decentralized admin, SPFx especially, it is still full trusted JavaScript running in the browser's context. So whenever you actually give the responsibility for somebody else to host and run SharePoint Framework solutions in the site collection level, you actually delegate the responsibility of validating, in quotes, the code as well. So with great power, there comes great responsibilities as well. So please do remember the impact from a governance perspective around this one. But it is no doubt a great capability and absolutely important for certain enterprise scenarios. Quickly, just to iterate where we are from a SharePoint development roadmap perspective. The title is just shipped. I don't know why. Well, Ignite week or after, we shipped quite a lot of functionalities, and the latest one will be the site-specific app catalog, which is now allowing the scope deployment. It is available today globally. So you're able to use and enable that in the site, in your site collections. Now, the coming soon is the asset included in deployment packages. This is something which requires a client-side packages update, so Yeoman template packages being updated, and this is coming super soon. I think last time I said it's coming in matter of days rather than weeks or months, and now we can probably say it's coming in matter of hours rather than days or weeks, so it's coming quite soon. You'll see an update communications obviously in social media and Twitter and Facebook and wherever when the latest packaging is available. And that's the site asset packaging is a massive deal because it will reduce or it will simplify the deployment of your packages to the SharePoint Online. So you don't have to worry about CD and hosting because we take care of the hosting for you. And that's a super cool thing. As part of that release, we've been updating also the videos and tutorial documentation so you can actually follow up on the changes on that one whenever stuff is getting up. Will the guidance, good question from Joel, will this contain instructions to update existing solutions? No, it actually doesn't. That's a fair point. Maybe we should work on the guidance on that one. Good point. Thank you for that. It is basically an existing, it's a super simple thing from a developer perspective. It's a one attribute in a package solution, JSON. How do you control is the assets getting packaged or not? And by default, if I remember, the value is true, so stuff is getting packaged. But fair point, we should double check the impact of this one and potentially document that for you as well. Now, the other stuff which is coming still by end of this year, site designs with extensibility point is coming by end of this year, so within the matter of week or two, because we need to get it shipped by end of this year because we promised to do so. And also the more Microsoft Graph support is planned to go out later this year as well. So really good news. And if you have some time on the Christmas holidays to check these things out, it's a great opportunity to test the previous stuff. Hub sites and Hub APIs, Groupify API, they are coming in the next quarter. Somebody last time when I actually showed this, somebody was then immediately asking, okay, so what happens in the Q2? What happens in the Q2? And we'll tell you more on the Q2 plans whenever we actually get things moving. For next calendar year, there's two kind of big events for SharePoint. The event number one is the North American SharePoint conference, which is in Las Vegas. So we'll use that as also as a SharePoint engineering announcement location, where we'll probably preview some of the upcoming capabilities. And then obviously Ignite in next year is a big announcement conference as well. But I think that's it from my side. Sorry for running slightly low on time. I'm going to blame Patrick on this time on that one. But I think the next thing is to let Russell and Chris to do a quick demos on their stuff.
That's fair. I hadn't talked for 2 months, so I felt like I needed to talk more.
That's true. Now, I think we need to create Russell. Are you ready to go first? And then we can move to Chris after that for a community demo.
I am ready to go. Can you hear me?
Yep, all good. All good.
Okay.
And you should have the right permissions to take over presentation.
Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep. Loading. And I got it. So thanks, Russell. Take it away.
Okay. Yeah, so when we allow users to share files in a SharePoint site, the sharing can get out of control, and it's often quite difficult to determine actually who has permissions to what documents and folders in a site. So I created a component I call a security grid. And what it does, it aims to give you a user at a glance view as to who has permission to what. So this is a sample of the grid. When I load it up, it's showing me a list of the users across the top of the page, and a list of all the lists and libraries across the left edge. And in the middle, it'll show you who has the selected permission. And I can select different permissions to view by using this toolbar up top. Currently, I'm showing people with view permissions I can instead say I want to see who has edit list permissions, and you'll see that the grid changed to reflect that, to show who had those permissions. I can also, if I want to select specific users, I can come in and say, hey, just show me these couple of users on the grid, and it'll show those users. Likewise, I can select which lists I want to view, just to narrow down if I'm only looking for specific information. And then for each list and library, I can go ahead and expand a library to see the folders within it. And as I do this, it's calculating who has the selected permissions to each of these items right down to the document level. So here we can see that Abe has edit permission on this document, Doc2, but George has nothing. If I switch this to view list items, I want to see who can view this. You'll see that they both have the view access. So that's basically how it works. I've also got some configuration settings in here. If an admin wanted to pre-configure this for a site owner, I've got some tools that would let them do that. Let me edit this web part. So if I wanted to pre-configure this and give it to a user, so they didn't know about custom permission levels, I could say I want to have the default permission type be edit list items permissions, for instance, and then uncheck the box that says let the user select the permission, and that will hide the ability for him to select his own permissions. Got the ability to show the name or the email on the top. That corresponds to this, which just toggles between showing the user's name and email. I can also show security groups rather than users if I like. So this is showing the security granted to the Active Directory groups within this site. I can let the users select users, so that will hide the user selection box so that whoever is using this cannot change the users. And then the title column width. This thing is actually resizable here. If you get too deep in the folder structure, you can just drag and drop to resize it. And then on the second page of the configuration, I can select if I want to show hidden lists and system lists. And again, whether I want to let the user change the list of selected lists, this will hide the control in the ribbon. And then finally, if I want to have just specific lists shown on the grid, I can select them here and either include or exclude those lists. Hit apply. And now I've filtered out the lists that are shown, and that's about it. That's how it works. I'll jump over to the code real quick here. The web part itself is pretty just standard out-of-the-box web part. The only thing done in here is really the property pane configuration. But he goes ahead and renders the SP security component. The first thing when this guy gets loaded, he calls into a service. Where is it? In his constructor, give me 1 second. Yeah, and component will mount. He calls into this SP security service to load data. I will go there. And in the load data method, I use the PMP solution to get the site users, site groups, role definitions, and the lists. So in one shot, I get everything from SharePoint so that I can continue to render the grid. And then he'll go back, that gets returned back to the security service, and he goes ahead and renders a details list. This is all using Fabric components. And the columns in that details list include a column for each user. So you'll see I'm including a column for each user that I got from SharePoint, and the render method for the column calls this render user item. And when I'm going, this is actually renders a cell for that user, and I call back into the security service this method to say, does the user have the permission? And he checks all the security bits that we got back from SharePoint to determine if the user does in fact have permissions, and then it renders the circle filled or not filled, depending on if the user has permissions. So that's a high-level overview of the application. Couple of things I want to do going forward. I want to be able to select multiple security levels, because 90% of the time people, I imagine, are going to say they want to see who has read and who has write to specific files. So I was thinking I could make it so that, it'd show red if the guy could read it and show green if he could write to it. I need to put in something to account for access requests that are outstanding. I would think if there's an outstanding access request to give someone access to a list or library, that this should reflect it. It doesn't currently because the person hasn't accepted the request. So I hope to work on that. And also anonymous access links. If there's an anonymous access link to a file, I think I need to denote that somehow in here, and I'm not quite sure how to do that yet. And then the big one is Active Directory groups. Currently, this does not work at all with Active Directory groups. It only works with SharePoint groups. So when I look at, let me go in here to, give me 1 second, site settings. Within SharePoint, when I add a group to SharePoint, the object that's created in the users list for an Active Directory group has this security, this SID in the login name, and I'm trying to figure out how to get that SID, the members of that group, from the graph, and I'm having trouble figuring that out. It works fine for modern groups because the login name that's stored in the user information list, that is the actual GUID of the object in Azure AD. So I can get the members of that group without any issues. It's just a matter of the Active Directory groups. I can't find a way to get that SID from Azure AD. So if anyone knows how that works, that would be very helpful. And that's about it from my end.
Cool. Thank you, Russell, for that one. Really, really, really great web part. And Luis is providing you potential solutions for the discussion as well. And obviously, if somebody can help with that, that would be brilliant. Now, I think we need to flip on Chris because we're running low on time. Again, like we always do. There would be so much to do and so much to talk about together. But Chris, thank you, Russell, for this one. And Chris, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good, all good. And loading starts. Cool.
Yeah. So you can see that screen stuff.
And we can see you. All
okay.
Good.
All right. So my name's Chris Kent. There's my Twitter. There's my blog. Feel free to reach out for anything. All right. So I want to show off a web part that's really just demoing how to use these reusable property pane controls. So if you guys haven't seen this yet, there's an open source library up on the GitHub. It's got a bunch of stuff. So out of the box, SharePoint Framework gives you a ton of different property pane controls. So these are the different types of controls when you click that pencil that show up over there. There's a bunch in there. The cool thing is it's really easy to add your own. So if you've got some ideas for a cool way to do that, this thing's totally open. Add them in there. You get some really nice ones like the list picker or a term picker that really wrap up a lot of that complexity for you. The two I'm going to focus on showing you today are the spin button and the color picker. Now these are just wrappers around the UI Fabric React components of the same name. However, you don't need to use React in your project at all. And in fact, the web part I'm going to show you is a no framework web part. So let's take a look at what it looks like. Okay. So here we've got a workbench, and if I go and I add my exciting SVG hero web part, you can see I get this beautiful PNP superhero. And when I click this edit button, that's where we start to see these properties show up. So here we've got the spin button property pane control, where I've got these nice little spin buttons here, and I can hit up or down, right? And you can see it's doing that on the step, so it's going up and down by 5. The nice thing is I can go all the way down. I've set a minimum value of 25. I can't go below that. Very similarly, I've got a maximum value up here, so I can't go beyond that. Different than like, say, a text control. So a text control always returns a string, right? So you're responsible for doing, a lot of the stuff there when you're trying to do a number. So right now the recommendation is generally use a slider, right? But when you need to be a little more specific than that, that's where you're going to use something like this. It's guaranteed to always come back as a number. If someone typed in, a string here, it's going to just default to that minimum value. Same thing, if someone types some kind of crazy value, right, it's going to go over the maximum. Meanwhile, they can still type in, like I've allowed 2 decimal places, which is configurable, right? You could type that in here. Okay? So all of that just kind of works together. This is an SVG image, which is why this is working the way it is. So that's kind of the spin button control. The other thing I didn't mention here is the suffix. So you can add this. Obviously, that's not returned back with the value. You just get back the number. But this is a really nice indicator to users exactly what they're setting. All right, so down here we've got the color picker control, which you see I've got a ton of them here. But if I want to come in here and I want to say, you know what, let's make this guy a little prettier, right? Let's get a yellow cape. Let's go for a nice red shirt. Let's adjust that diaper. Let's make that a green here. The nice thing is you can set these by dragging these around, but you can also grab the actual values you can set those. So if I wanted to, set the pants, so we've got a little more of a traditional Robin type look, I can hit that, and you can see all that gets updated kind of on the fly. So that's what the color picker control does. A couple things to know with the color picker is you can say turn off this alpha slider. You can also make it so it just shows full like this, but obviously when I'm showing so many of these, I like the inline style the best. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple things with that. So if we go back to these slides here, here's how you use those property pane controls. So you're just going to add them to your project. You're going to run this npm install command. All this is available in a really nice getting started guide that's available on the site. The URL's down there. You're just going to run that. It's going to add it into your project. And then you're going to do this one little step where you're going to open your config.json, and then underneath the localized resources node, you're going to add this property control strings. Okay? And then you're going to use the controls. It's very exciting. So I'll show you what that looks like for these two. A couple notes on this PNP man. So I took the original here, had a couple of problems with it here, mostly that it was a raster image, which made it difficult for me to scale this thing when I was using it on slides. And that's where this has come from. If you guys want to use that, it's totally open. There's both the original, which is also now an SVG, but then there's this new one, which is just slightly changed those proportions a little bit. You guys feel free to have at it. It works nice in PowerPoint. That's what these are. There we go. Well, let's take a look at the actual code. All right. So again, this is my little web part. Very simple. In the config.json, after I've run that npm install, I've just copied in this property control strings. You can cut and paste that directly from the website. Just put it on there. That's just going to make sure that the localized strings inside the property pane controls are synced up. And then in the actual web part, you can see here's where I've got the standard kind of property panes that I could be using. But down here, very similarly, I'm just importing the ones I need directly from there. And if you go to that guide, it'll show you the exact thing you can cut and paste for each of these. So here's where I've got my color picker, and color picker style, which is just an enum, and then my spin button. Right here, you can see where I've declared my properties interface. You can see I'm expecting the CSS compatible string back from the color picker. So those are just string values that I'm going to use directly. And then I can be guaranteed that spin button is always going to return me a number. So I've got that here in height. And the way I'm translating that to that SVG image is I'm directly rendering the SVG image right here, which is just something created in Inkscape. And then if you open up an SVG image in, say, Visual Studio Code, you're going to get this text view. And you can cut and paste that right in here. And you see I'm just inserting the properties directly in it. So there's the height. You scroll down quite a bit of ways, you see where I'm starting to put the skin in, right, for the hands, and all that. So that should be pretty straightforward. You can check all this out. This web part is available as part of the web part samples. Now, if we look at actually how I'm getting those property panes on here, this should look pretty familiar if you've done any of the property panes. I'm just doing a property field spin button, and I'm setting a couple of those values here, right? So suffix, your minimum, your maximum, the step, the decimal places, you can adjust all that pretty easy. Same with the color picker. It's pretty straightforward. If you wanted to say hide that alpha slider, right, it's right here, and you're just going to say true, and that's going to get rid of that. And that's pretty much it. So there again, these are just two of the controls in there. There's a ton in there. Please feel free to add to this. It's a really powerful library. Make your web parts quite a bit better. Okay, that's all I got.
Awesome. Very cool demo there. Both you guys, Russell and Chris, thank you very much. Really great to see the stuff the community does. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have done some work around SharePoint Framework or the client-side libraries or just client-side development on SharePoint in general, and you'd like to demo that on this call, you just have to get in touch with either myself or Vesa, and we're happy to help set that up. So if you've done a new demo into the SharePoint Framework web parts, that's a great source for these kind of things. So just let us know if you're interested in doing a demo. Would love to have you on the call. So that looks like our time for this week. We don't have much time for Q&A. But our next meeting is going to be December 21st. I know this is a holiday period for a lot of folks. I will be working, so this meeting will happen. But understand if folks can't make it, we'll have the recording, of course, like always. And then our next general meeting is the 14th of December, so that would be next Thursday. So as you're familiar with, I think by now, these are every other week. So look forward to seeing you at those meetings. And remember, learn, reuse, and share. And that's the is that our new PNP motto? Did I leave and we changed mottos?
Well, that was what we introduced in Ignite, yeah. So you kind of left and then you came back. So, but sharing is caring is still a slogan. So, but learn, reuse, share is.
We just got sharing is caring put on hoodies, and now already deprecate the hoodie.
No. That slogan still exists. All good.
No more caring. I like it. But anyway, thank you all for attending the call. It's great to be back, and look forward to talking with you all in the coming months and weeks. And have a great weekend.
Thank you. Cheers.